This is Gemara in Yoma, Daf Beis, a new month, Chodesh Iyar, a new Masechta, Masechta Yoma. Mazel Tov again to everyone on Shkolim and Amir Tashem. We begin with a tefillah that the clarity Amir Tashem should be here with Yoma, and we should all be zeichet to learn together. And we're learning this entire Masechta is about the Avodah of the Kohen Gadol in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the entire Avodah of Yoma Kippur. And Amir Tashem, we hope that a few more months, well before then hopefully, but hopefully the Beis HaMikdash will be here, and will actually, all this will be relevant as the Kohen Gadol will once again be serving and doing the Avodah Lifnai V'Lifnim. A new month, but one last day we'd like to sponsor as the Ilan Neshama from the Grun family for Chaim Mordechai ben Naftali Tzvi. The learning of the entire month of Nisan was a trend is Chos Ilan Neshmasai. And one last day today on Aleph Iyar, we like to dedicate as a special Chos Ilan Neshama, as well as a Chos Ilan Neshama for Yechezkel David Shraga Feivel ben Yosef Yisrael. The Neshama should have a tremendous Ilan Neshama, and it should be a Nechama for the entire family. Of course, our Chaylim men ben Vega Chaim and Sar Shalom Belchania Shalom Sivan Reizid those are Baskanel Basim Chaysay Yisrael ben Mindel. As a friend of Shalei Shalom Bas Navim Shafigur Shemchanav Davini Tvir Shmuel Ben Tiel Daniel Ben Chana Rezel Malchai Besim the brachos of Musa Dinin Ben Shin Windows Sim Chatavi Ben Avia Fesh Vim Take a Diver Mechel Sun as Daily Huva Menachem Mendel Ben Taiba B'Soi Shachali Israel, as well as Chosiva for Atalea Bas Ita and Menachem Mendel Ben Elisheva. So we begin Masechtas Yoma, and as we pointed out, this Masechta is going to deal primarily with the Avodah of the Kohen Gadol inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and the last parak will deal with the contemporary, we'll call it, but the way that we do Yom Kippur and the halachas nowadays. So we begin the Mishnah. Shivas Yomim Kodim Yom Kippurim, 7 days before Yom Kippur. Mafrishin Kohen Gadol mi Beisai. They would separate the Kohen Gadol from his house, and where would they put him? L'lishchas Panhedrin. They would put him into a room called the Lishchas Parhedrin, which later in the Masechta will deal with exactly where it is, what it is. We're going to be having Amir Tashem, such fabulous pictures. That is all to come. And they would appoint a second Kohen Gadol in his place. Why? Shema Yara by Psal. Perhaps there'll be a Psal. Perhaps the first Kohen Gadol will become Pasal. Says Rashi. Baruch Hashem, we have our best friend. We have Rashi back with us. Now the top Rashi says that the entire Avodah is only kosher with the Kohen Gadol. We learn out from the Pasuk, and then Rashi continues and he points out that the potential psal that we're discussing is that maybe he'll have a psal keri or any other tovma which is going to prevent him from going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim and doing the Avodah. So we appoint a second Kohen Gadol to be waiting just in case. So two halachas. Halacha number one, we take the Kohen Gadol, we make him 7 days wait in the Lishkas Panhedrin so he doesn't become tummy. And halacha number two is we make a Kohen Gadol waiting just in case. Rav Yehuda adds on a third halacha. Af isha acheres b'saktin lai. We appoint a second wife for the Kohen Gadol. Why? Shema tamas ishtai. Perhaps his wife is going to die. Shnemar, and the pasuk teaches us v'chir ba'adai ba'ad be'isai, that the Avodah has to be done ba'adai for himself, u'ba'ad be'isai, and for his entire family. And be'isai, what's that a reference to? Zu ishtai, that's a reference to his wife. And from there we learn out that the Kohen Gadol has to have a wife at the time of doing the Avodah, and therefore for that reason we ensure that he's going to have a second wife in waiting just in case he becomes, the first wife is nifter. Amrullah, the Chachamim said to Rabbi Yehuda, you've gone too far. If that's what you're going to do, then maybe you should have another wife. Maybe that wife is going to die, and therefore there's no entit. Therefore, say the Chachamim, we do not have to give the Kohen Gadol a second wife. So we have in the Mishnah two halachas about the Kohen Gadol. Number one is we separate him for 7 days to Lishkas Parhedrin. Number two is we point to second Kohen Gadol. Then we have a machlekes Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim whether we have to as well appoint and make the Kohen Gadol get married to a second wife. Rav Yehuda is concerned because we learn out from the pasuk that the Kohen Gadol has to be married, which we'll just point out quickly has halachic ramifications brought down in halacha by the Shliach Tzibur, the person who is representing Klal Yisrael, similar to the Kohen Gadol on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur as well. Lechatchila is supposed to be married, and it comes from this halacha that the Kohen Gadol representing Klal Yisrael should be married. So to the Shliach Tzibur should be the same. Says the Gemara, and whereas the Chachamim argue and say you don't have to appoint a second wife for the Kohen Gadol. Tonight also we learned in the Mishnah. Shivas Yomim Kodim Sreifas HaPara, 7 days prior to the burning of the Para Aduma, they would separate the Kohen who is going to burn the Para Aduma, his job his avoda was going to be to burn the paraduma. We separate him lilishchas shalpanei abira to a special room that's on top of the bira safaina mizracha on the northeastern side of the Beis Hamikdash. What was this room called? Lishchas Beis Ha'even Ha'isa Nikris, and we call this room the Lishchas Beis Ha'even. So a very parallel halacha, just like in our Mishnah, there's halacha that the kohen gadol we have to separate for 7 days. So too says a different Mishnah. The kohen who's going to do the avoda of the para aduma and burn it, he as well has to be separated for 7 days. Says the Gemara, first of all, parenthetical points. Why was that room, the room where they separated the kohen who's going to burn the paraduma, why was it called the Beis Ha'even? The Gemara answers, because everything that they did with the paraduma, all the utensils used were kliglalim with manure, avanim and stone, and adama and ground. Obviously, the common denominator being that none of these items were able to become tamei. So why do we have to use items specifically that cannot become tamei? Explains the Gemara. My time, what's the reason? A very unique halacha. One would think a para aduma has to be done by a kohen who has the utmost purity, but that's not true. The halacha is a tful yoim is allowed to be the kohen that deals with the para aduma. What's a tful yoim? Something we've seen many times. Let's remind ourselves. A tful yoim is someone who went to the mikvah. He was toivel, but he did not have herev shemesh. The sun did not set, which of course is the condition in order to ensure complete purity. Is the sun has to set? But this person this kohen went to the mikvah, but the sun did not set. And the halacha is he is allowed to be the one dealing with the para aduma. But the problem is, people are going to murmur and talk about that, the para aduma is able to be done with a kohen that's not so tahor. And that's the reason why they made special halachas safeguarding the sanctity of the para aduma. One of those halachas being that all the utensils utilized cannot become tamei. And a second halacha really is a first cousin, which we'll see tomorrow, is this entire halacha of the kohen after separating for 7 days is in reality an offshoot of that as well, which we're going to get more to tomorrow. The Tanana, we quote the makar of this halacha of para aduma. They would make the kohen that's going to burn the para, they make him tamei. Why do they make him tamei? For in order, then they make him go to the mikvah. And then they would not let nightfall to happen. On the day he's going to burn the para aduma, that day they made him tamei. He went to the mikvah. He did not have harav shemesh. He did not have sunset. So now he's in that in-between stage. He's called a tful yoim. But Allah is he's kosher. Why do they do that specifically? In order to counteract that which the Sedukim were those who only learned Torah Shebeksav, the biblical law, the written text, but not Torah Shebal Peh, not the oral text. Shahayu Oimrim, they would say, that they only were allowed to do the halacha, they're only allowed to burn the paraduma after after the sunset. We disagree. The halacha is that no, you do not need sunset. You're allowed to do it when you're at full yom. Therefore, they purposely made him tamei. They purposely made him go to the mikvah, but they did not allow the sun to set. But because of that, because we're enabling a kohen, and not only enabling, not only is it allowed, but we want the kohen that's going to do it to be not 100% tahor. We want it to be a full yom. Therefore, like we spoke out, special utensils that are not mekabel tama, that no one is mezalzel in the avodah. And that is the special halacha of para aduma. Again, a first cousin that we brought down because the same halacha of separating the kohen for 7 days prior to the service, it applies to the para aduma like it applies to the kohen gadol. But now another secondary din. What's the reason that the room that they put that kohen in, the room which was called the Beis Ha'even, why was it in the northeastern side of the Beis Hamikdash? Explains the Gemara. Since the paraduma is a carbon chatos, and it has to be the northern side, and it also says with regard to the paraduma el noichach, it should be opposite oyel ma'id. Therefore, that's referring to the western, the eastern side. I'm sorry. So to kill rabban lishcha sfaina mizracha, sfaina for the chatas element, and mizracha east for the noichach, the opposite of the oyel mayed. Keichad will have a akiras, will have a hecker that the avodah that they're doing is special, that they're in the middle of about to do the para aduma. That's why they did it in this special place. Now, one more, a third. This is the third. We'll call it secondary din. The first was we discussed the utensils that they used and why they used utensils that cannot become tamei in order to ensure that no one would be mizalzel and sheep in the avodah. The second was we discussed why they did it specifically in the northeastern side, because we learned out it's a chatos plus it's a noichach, it's opposite to oil maid. And the third is my bira. What is it called? We said that it's al pnei bira, this room. Why is it? What's the bira? That was just the name of the place. A place in Arabayis which was called bira. That is the first answer of the Gemara, but says the Gemara, but Reish Lakish disagrees. That's Rav Yochanan. Of course, we always have Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish always disagreeing. We'll have that numerous times in the first few daf. Reish Lakish Amar Kol HaMikdash Kola Karei Bira. No, the entire base HaMikdash is called Bira Shnemar Abira Sheichanaisi, the Bira that is prepared. So that is the end of the halachas of para aduma. 3 secondary dinim we learned about para aduma. Again, all brought here because of the main din that they had to separate for 7 days before doing the avodah of the para aduma, similar to the separation of the kohen gadol for 7 days before the avodah of the Yom Kippur, going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now we go back to the original din, our din of Yom Kippur. Minna hani mili. From where do we know this halacha? Where does this din prisha, this din separation, this din that the Kohen Gadol has to go for 7 days, has to go into a special room and the halachas, where does that come from? Omar Rav Minyumi bar Chiklaya, Omar Machasya bar Idi, Omar Rav Yochanan. Let's just remember that this is Rav Yochanan talking. This is going to come back tomorrow, a different statement of Rav Yochanan, which will just foreshadow what's going to happen, which is going to be a bit difficult. But this is Rav Yochanan teaches us, where do we learn this din of prisha? Amar Kra, it says in the Torah, Kasher Asa b'Yom Hazeh, this is the pasuk by the Miluim, the inauguration of the Mishkan, which is almost this week's parsha. We just had Shmini, we just had right afterwards by Nadav and Avihu, but now we have Kasher Asa b'Yom Hazeh, Tziva Hashem la'asos, lechaber aleichem la'asos. The lechaber aleichem, I'm sorry. The pasuk says, just like Kasher Asa b'Yom Hazeh, Tziva Hashem la'asos, Hashem commanded you la'asos to do, lechaber aleichem to give you atonement. Now this is a period of the Miluim, of the inauguration of the Mishkan. Then the pasuk says, this is what you should do. Now the words la'asos and lechaber, the Gemara Darshins number 1, la'asos elu ma'isa para, that refers to the para aduma, that the halachas of the para aduma are similar to these halachas of the miluim of the inauguration, specifically the halachas of the inauguration that they had to have a 7-day preparatory period, which is we're learning the 7-day separation period. Lechaper, what does it mean to get an atonement? Elu ma'isa Yom Kippurim, that refers to the Yom Kippur Avodah. And that is the Makar, how we know the Din Prisha. So where do we know Din Prisha? We know it from the Yimei Hamiluim, the 7-day inauguration period, just like they had a 7-day inauguration period. So too we have a 7-day separation period of the Kohen Gadol by Yom Kippur, by the Avodah, and number 2, by the Para Aduma. Now we're going to have a whole series of questions, and the Gemara is going to try to figure out whether this pasuk is specific only by Para Aduma and only by Yom Kippur, or etc. Says the Gemara. Bishlama, we're about 8 lines to the bottom. I understand that you cannot learn that this pasuk is only referring to the para aduma. Why not? Lechaper ksiv. It says lechaper, to give an atonement. Upara lav baskapari, and a para aduma is not referring to an atonement, and therefore the pasuk says la'asois lechaper. The word lechaper cannot be referring to the para aduma. Therefore, the pasuk has to also be talking about Yom Kippur. Ella, we'll speak at a point in a moment. Ella ema kulei krab Yom Kippurim ksiv. But maybe, how do you know it's teaching us 2 halachas? One halacha of la'asais a para aduma, a second halacha of lechaper of avodas Yom Kippurim. Maybe the pasuk is only referring to Yom Kippur, teaching me that it's a 7-day waiting preparatory separation period by Yom Kippur. Just to parenthetically point out, people are wondering, the para aduma was a kapara. The answer was no, only the original para aduma was a kapara of the Chet Egel, but all subsequent para adumas gave someone purity, tahira, but it wasn't giving a kapara atonement. Says the Gemara, Amri Yoliv Siva Tziva. The Gemara answers that had we know the pasuk is referring to both the Para Aduma and Yom Kippur Gzeir Shava Tziva Tziva. Tziva it says in our pasuk Tziva Hashem Lasis. Uksiva also it says over there Zois Chukas HaTorah Asher Tziva Hashem Leimar. This is the Chukah. This is by Para Aduma. Mal Halon Para Afkan Para. So what do we see? We see that the Torah must also be referring to Para Aduma. Don't tell me that this pasuk of lechaper la'asa is the pasuk of the 7-day separation preparatory period that we're learning from the Yimei Amilum, the inauguration of the Mishkan. Don't tell me that it's only by Yom Kippur, because it says Siva, and we have Gzeir Shava, Tziva to Tziva, and Tziva's Para Aduma. So too, the pasuk also must be referring to Para Aduma. Now we also point out Umakan Prisha, Aflalam Prisha, just like over here, there's a din of Prisha separation. So too, there's going to be a din of prisha of separation by all of these cases that we are discussing. As we move along to Beis Amid Beis, asks the Gemara is not content. Ve'ima tziva tziva d'yom kippurim dechsev. How do you know that tziva you just told me refers to the tziva of the Para Aduma? No, maybe it refers to tziva of Yom Kippur. Dechsev, the Torah says, Vayaz kasher tziva Hashem, and they did like God commanded, as Moshe to Moshe. So we see that the word tziva is also used in conjunction with Yom Kippur. So why are you so convinced that the Torah is honing in on Siva by Para Aduma? Answers the Gemara, no, because it's more, and this is going to be the common theme of all the answers coming, that it's more comparable to compare the Yom Kippur and the Para Aduma to the Yemei Amiluim. Answers the Gemara, done in Siva dilafnei Asiva Asiya, made Siva dilafnei Asiya. It's more comparable. The word Siva that appears in the pasuk before the word Asiya is more comparable to the word Siva that appears after the word Asiya. Meaning, Vayasa kasher Tziva. The word Siva is after Vayas. That's by Yom Kippur. So that is not as comparable as to by Miluim, by the inauguration of the Mishkan. The word Siva is before Vayas, and so too by Para Aduma, the word Siva is before, so that word Siva must be coming to include that the din of Prisha separation by the Para Aduma. Ve'ein done in Siva delachar Siva mitziva delnei Asiya. And we do not learn out Yom Kippur when it's afterwards, and therefore that's how we know that the pasuk refers to Lachaper as Yom Kippur, Siva is Siva Gzeir Shava is the Para Aduma. The Gemara continues, Ve'ima Siva dekarbanes ksif. Maybe the word Siva, and now we're going to we're going to have, I don't know, about 3 different attempts that maybe the pasuk is referring to something else. Maybe the Gzeir Shava, which we know the Gzeir Shavas were taught from Rebbe to Talmud, but only the actual Gzeir Shava was taught, Tziva. But very often the Talmidim were unsure, didn't remember, or maybe there was disagreements into what was the Gzeir Shava coming to add on. So says the Gemara, maybe Tziva, ve'ema Tziva, dekarbanis ksiv. Maybe it's coming to add on that by every carbon in the Beis HaMikdash, the Kohen has to separate for 7 days prior. Tichsev, the Torah says, B'yom Sivasas b'nei Yisrael, that it has to be that there's a commandment to Kal Yisrael, to the Kohanim, about the Karbanis. So maybe that word Tziva adds on that just like by the Miluim, the inauguration, there was a din that you have to separate for 7 days. So too by all Karbanis is a din of separation. Answers the Gemara, done in Tziva made Tziva, vein done in Tziva, Savasoi made Tziva. By Karbanis, what did the pasuk say? It's Savasoi. It didn't just say Tziva. So it's not exactly the same. Says the Gemara, come on. We've been learning Gemara too long to fall for that one. But it says what? Vishava kainu ba kain, a famous drasha. Zui shiva, zui bia. What do we learn now? We learn out the words vishav and uba very similar. Returning come. And therefore we learn out one from the other. Says the Gemara. So why by us you bothered tziva and savasoi? That one is with a hey and one is with a taf? It's the same word. It means sav. Answers the Gemara, no. Hani mili by Rav Yishmael echad like the Damila. Over there, we have nothing else to learn from it, so we can say that Shav and Bar are comparable. But by us, it's more comparable. That Yom Kippur, Para Aduma is more comparable. Therefore, we're going to come to add on the din of Para Aduma, and that's where the din of separation will come to be learnt out from the Gzeir Shava Tziva. Now the Gemara summarizes a bit of a summary. L'chaber ilu ma'isi Yom Kippurim. So l'chaber, we said, that's referring to Yom Kippur. Says the Gemara. 1 second. How do you know? Ve'ema kapara the karbanis. One more time. Maybe the kapara is all karbanis. Answers the Gemara. 1 second. Mia dinan hey kayin misrami the baile prisha. What are you suggesting? You're suggesting that the word kapara lechaper shouldn't teach me that by Yom Kippur there's a din of 7 day separation. By all karbanis it should be. Says Gemara. How's that possible? How do you know which kayin is going to be the one to bring your carbon that he has to go and separate for 7 days? Says Gemara. Amrei. They said alam aloi. Why not? What's the big deal? Maybe there'll be a lacha that every single kohen has to separate for 7 days prior to working the Beis Hamikdash. The entire mishmar, which was they broke up the kohanim into different groups, maybe the entire group before going to work in the Beis Hamikdash has to separate for 7 days. Answers the Gemara, Danin davar shekavua leizman, midavar shekavua leizman. We compare and we equate something that this man is set to something that this man is set. Meaning, lechaper comes to teach me by Yom Kippur, which is a set time, and not all karbanos that don't have a set time. Which comes to exclude all karbanos that are brought in every day. Says the Gemara. Fine. So you told me Lechaber is referring to Yom Kippur. Vema regalim. Maybe he's referring to the Shalosh regalim. Meaning, and that's a set time. Maybe by every one of the Shalosh regalim, there's halacha that the Kohanim have to separate for 7 days prior to the regal. Answers the Gemara, Dan and davar shenoyig pamachas b'shana midavar anoyig pamachas b'shana. No, just like the Shivas Me'amiluim was once a year, so do we learn out. We learn out to Yom Kippur, which is once a year. They were not once a year. Says Gemara, fine. Maybe it refers to one regal. Then maybe you're right. It can't be all 3 regalim because it's only once a year. So fine. So one of the 3 regalim, there should be a lach of separation for 7 days. You'll tell me, we don't know which regal. Maybe it's Pesach, why? That's the first one mentioned in the pasuk. Or maybe it's Sukkos. Why? There's many mitzvahs on Sukkos. As Rashi over here points out, Lulav Aravan, Is Chamayim, etc. Ella, so says the Gemara, can't be. Ella Donim Prisha Shivas Liyoim Echad, Me Prisha Shiva Liyoim Echad. That is more equatable and more comparable to learn Yom Kippur from the Shivas Yimei Miluim to the other Yom Tovim. Why? Because Yom Kippur is 1 day. Just like after the 7 days of inauguration, the 8th day was the day that we're discussing. So too, so we learn Yom Kippur. Ve'in Donim Prisha Shiva L'Shiva, Me Prisha Shiva L'Yom Echad, and we're not going to learn out from the either Sukkos or Pesach are all 7 day blocks of time. So we're not going to learn out they have to separate for 7 days before Yom Tif. From somewhere they got to separate 7 days for 1 day. Says the Gemara, Ve'ema, 3rd lines into the white line, Shmini Depresha Shiva L'Yom Echadu. Maybe it's talking about Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres, you have to separate for 7 days prior to 1 day Yom Tif. Shmini Atzeres, it's its own Yom Tif. Answers the Gemara, no, we learn out something that has no kedusha in front of it, like Yom Kippur, like the Shivas Yimei Amiluim. We're not going to learn out Shmini Atzeres that has kedusha in front of it. Says Gemara, 1 second. If you read it fast, it sounds good. But let's turn on our brains. 1 second. It's a kal v'chaimer. Who? Hash the davar she'ein kedusha lefanav. So that does not have holiness in front of it. But the Shivas Yimei Amiluim by Prishan, you have to separate for 7 days. Davar she'ein kedusha lefanav le'kol shkein. Certainly you have to separate for 7 days. Something that has kedusha in front of it, which is referring to maybe Shmini Atzeres. Answers the Gemara. Amr of Mesharshia. We're going to have 2 terutzim over here, and we'll conclude with that. Loi hazeksiv kozeh. It says kozeh, that the pasuk by the Milum says hazeh, which comes to learn out that it's kozeh like this, something which is more comparable to the Miluim, and therefore Yom Kippur is going to be more equatable to the Miluim. Meaning, the Gemara is answering a very unique answer. Even though Shmini Atzeres maybe it makes more sense to require separation because it's a kal v'chaimer that it has kedusha in front of it, but it's not as comparable to Yom Kippur. So says Rav Mesharshia, hazeh kozeh. Has to be like this one, and therefore we only want to come to include Yom Kippur. Says the Gemara, Rav Ashi Amar, 2nd teretz, 2 lines from the bottom, Mika midi di'ikar regel lo bayi prisha tafel didei bayi prisha. Says Rav Ashi, this can't be. You're going to tell me, you know what's going to happen? The regular Yom Tov of Sukkot is not going to be a din of separation. But Kam Shmini Atzeres, the Tafel, the secondary, the auxiliary part of Yantif, that requires separation, that can't be, says Rav Ashi. And the Gemara speaks out. And if you're going to tell me that Shmini Atzeres is not a Tafel, it's not auxiliary, it's mamash 100% its own Yantif, it's not true. Huhani immediately, that's only Le'inyan turning over to Gimel and Aleph, that's only referred to Pizar Kishav. Which means, Rashi points out, it has its own payis, its own lottery, it has its own, it has its own zman, shechiyanu, it has its own, the reish refers to its own regel, it has its own carbon, it has its own shear, has its own bracha, but says Gemara, avol le'ini tashlumim derishnu. But at the end of the day, even if Shmini Atzeres is still a din of tashlumim, it's a makeup for the first part of Yantif. Now we learned in the Mishnah, Mishlei Chag, b'yom tav harishon shel Chag, chogeg v'hoilech kol regel kulay, v'yom tav ha'achron shel Chag. They're even allowed to bring the karbanos on Shmini Atzeres, so at some level it is auxiliary. So says Rav Ashi, it's impossible that there's a din of prisha for Shmini Atzeres if there's no din of prisha on the other days of Yantif. And we'll pick up from here tomorrow, Mirz Hashem, as we continue in Masechtas Yoma.